Alright, let me set the scene for you. For decades, we've been told a simple black and white story about good versus evil in a galaxy far away. The Galactic Empire is this monolithic, oppressive dictatorship, right? They have stormtroopers marching through the streets, star destroyers blotting out the skies, and leaders who are so evil they might as well twirl their mustaches. But what if it's not? What if we've only been hearing one side of the story? What if the Empire, for all its faults, had some valid points? Think about it. They took over a galaxy that was falling apart, one riddled with corruption, crime, and constant war. And instead of letting the chaos continue, they imposed order. Let me be clear. I'm not here to defend Darth Vader choking people left and right, or Palpatine's master plan. But when you look past the surface, the Galactic Empire starts to seem less like a bunch of cartoon villains and more like a group of leaders trying to govern a galaxy that had spiraled out of control. They brought stability, economic growth, and military strength, things a galaxy that vast and chaotic desperately needed. By the end of this, you might still root for the rebels, and that's fine. But I'm here to challenge you to think a little deeper. Let's explore why the Empire might not have been as wrong as we've been led to believe. Buckle up, because this is going to get controversial. Before we dive into today's video, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are subscribed to the channel. Less than 4% of you are actually subscribed. I love making these videos and love waking up to comments from both good and bad. You might not always agree with me, and that's okay. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. It's free and only takes a second. Thank you for being here. Now let's get back to the video. Let's start with this. The galaxy before the Empire was an absolute mess. Think about it. The Republic, for all its high-minded ideals, was a bloated, dysfunctional institution riddled with corruption. Senators like Palpatine were manipulating the system from the inside, and corporate entities like the Trade Federation were essentially running amok. The Republic couldn't enforce its laws, couldn't defend its citizens, and couldn't keep the peace. Then came the Clone Wars, the final nail in the coffin. Systems were breaking away left and right. Crime syndicates like the Hutts ruled the Outer Rim. But Jedis, they were peacekeepers, sure, but not soldiers. They couldn't handle a galaxy-wide conflict. The Republic was crumbling under its own weight. Enter the Empire. Now, I'm not saying their methods were good, but they did what the Republic couldn't. They centralized power. They stopped the endless bickering in the Senate by dissolving it. They enforced law and order, sometimes brutally, but effectively. People in the core worlds, at least, could go about their lives without worrying about separatist invasions or political instability. And what about the rebellion? Their goal was to tear all of that down, to overthrow the government and replace it with what? A return to the good old days of the Republic. A system that had already failed once. Freedom is important, sure, but is it worth sacrificing stability for? It's a tough question, and one the galaxy had to grapple with. The truth is, a galaxy-wide government isn't easy to run. And sometimes, a strong hand is what's needed to keep things from falling apart. Let's talk about the galactic economy. There were countless trade disputes, regional currencies, and predatory corporations like the Trade Federation, Techno-Union, and Banking Clan, all exploiting the system for their own gain. Planets on the Outer Rim were often left to fend for themselves, stuck in poverty and lawlessness while the core worlds prospered. And here's the thing. Economic growth wasn't evenly distributed, but it was growth nonetheless. Core worlds like Coruscant, and even some Outer Rim planets, saw improvements in infrastructure and stability. The Empire imposed a level of order on galactic trade that hadn't been seen before. Now, let's look at the rebellion. They blew up Imperial facilities, sabotaged supply chains, and disrupted trade routes. From their perspective, they were striking a blow against tyranny. But for the average citizen, that kind of disruption wasn't liberating. It was devastating. People rely on stable economies to survive, and the rebellion's actions threw that stability into chaos. So here's the question. Was the Empire's economic control oppressive? Absolutely. But did it bring prosperity to parts of the galaxy that had been neglected under the Republic? Also yes. Maybe there's a lesson here about the cost of freedom versus the benefits of order. If there's one thing you can't deny, it's that the Empire had a vision. Palpatine wasn't just building an empire for the sake of power. He genuinely believed in creating a unified galaxy. One government, one set of laws, one ruler. It's a brutal vision, sure, but it's also an ambitious one. Think about how fragmented the galaxy was under the Republic. Thousands of systems, each with its own laws, cultures, and agendas. It was impossible to get anything done. The Empire swept that aside and replaced it with a single, centralized authority. For the first time in galactic history, there was a real sense of unity, at least on paper. Now, you could argue that this unity came at too high a cost. The Empire ruled through fear and oppression, but the alternative was disunity, which led to constant wars and chaos. Maybe the galaxy wasn't ready for true freedom. Maybe it needed a strong hand to guide it, even if that hand was an iron fist. Finally, let's talk about perspective. The Star Wars story is told from the rebels' point of view. Of course, the Empire looks like the bad guys. They're the ones our heroes are fighting against. But what if we flipped the narrative? Imagine the Empire's version of the story. They'd probably call the rebellion a group of dangerous insurgents who destabilized the galaxy. They'd talk about the billions of lives lost during the Civil War and the chaos that followed the fall of the Empire. To them, the rebels weren't freedom fighters. They were anarchists tearing down the only thing holding the galaxy together. History is complicated, and it's always written by the victors. The Empire might not have been good, but they weren't entirely wrong either. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. Defense is one of the most overlooked aspects of the Empire's rule. Think back to the Republic era. The Republic didn't even have a standing army. When the Clone Wars broke out, they had to commission the Kaminoans to create a clone army practically overnight. That's like realizing your house has no locks after the burglars are already inside. The Empire didn't make that mistake. They built the largest and most powerful military the galaxy had ever seen. Star Destroyers patrolled the skies, stormtroopers kept order on the ground, and TIE fighters provided air support. They even created superweapons like the Death Star, but undeniably effective as a deterrent. Their goal was clear: ensure no one could challenge Imperial rule, either from within or outside the galaxy. Now, you might be thinking, but wasn't the Empire's military oppressive? And yes, it was. But it also served as a unifying force in a galaxy that was constantly at war. Crime syndicates, rogue warlords, and separatist factions were all kept in check, because the Empire's military might was so overwhelming. The rebellion, on the other hand, destabilized that balance. They didn't just fight the Empire, they created power vacuums. When the Empire pulled out of a region, who filled the gap? Often, it was criminal organizations or local warlords. The galaxy didn't suddenly become a peaceful utopia after the Death Star blew up. If anything, it became even more dangerous for ordinary citizens. So the question is, would you rather live under a heavy-handed government that keeps the galaxy stable, or in a lawless void where the strongest and most ruthless rise to power? It's not an easy choice, but it's one the galaxy had to make. Let's get into the morality of the rebellion. On the surface, they're the heroes, right? Fighting for freedom, democracy, and all that good stuff. But dig a little deeper, and things start to get murky. First off, the rebellion wasn't one unified group. It was a loose coalition of factions, some of which were, let's just say, morally questionable. Take Saw Gerrera, for example. His guys weren't freedom fighters, they were extremists. They didn't care about collateral damage or civilian casualties, as long as they could hurt the Empire. Is that heroism, or is it terrorism? And then there's the fact that the rebellion often targeted Imperial facilities that weren't strictly military. Think about the Death Star. Yes, it was a weapon of mass destruction, but it also had thousands of people. They weren't all evil. Some of them were just there for a paycheck. Blowing up the Death Star wasn't just an attack on the Empire, it was an attack on everyone who worked there. The Empire, for all its faults, was at least consistent. The rebellion, on the other hand, was willing to compromise its morals to achieve its goals. Does the end justify the means? And there you have it. 6 reasons why the Galactic Empire might have actually been right. Look, I'm not saying they were perfect. Far from it. The Empire was authoritarian, oppressive, and built on fear. They ruled with an iron fist, crushed dissent, and committed some of the galaxy's most horrific acts. But was their vision entirely misguided? That's where things get interesting. The Empire brought order to a galaxy that was descending into chaos. Under the Republic, corruption ran rampant, systems were neglected, and war was inevitable. The Empire centralized power, eliminated corruption in its own brutal way, and imposed stability on a scale the Republic never could. Yes, that stability came at a high cost, but for many planets, it was better than the alternative. Lawlessness, crime syndicates, and constant war. This isn't about picking sides, it's about recognizing the shades of grey in a story we've been told as black and white. Maybe the Empire wasn't entirely evil, maybe the rebels weren't entirely righteous, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's problems couldn't be solved by either side. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If you were an ordinary citizen in that galaxy, just someone trying to live your life, feed your family, and survive, would you side with the rebels and their dream of freedom? Or would you stick with the Empire, flawed as it was, for the stability it brought? Thanks so much for watching. I spend a good bit of time making sure each video is great. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps out and means a lot to me. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.